الحمد لله هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله لقد جاء رسول ربنا بالحق. All praise is due to Allah who guided us to this, and we would not have found the way if Allah had not guided us. Certainly the messengers of our Lord brought the truth. Salamun Alaykum, and good morning, brothers and sisters, fellow speakers, and to our online audience. I want to thank all of you for connecting with us this morning, and I hope you are looking forward to the many discussions we have planned as much as I am. We are very pleased to be able to welcome those of you that have been with us for a long time now, as well as those of you who are new to our 12th annual Tawheed conference. Everyone here that chose to be part of our Tawheed conference in the past has a mutual passion to know the truth about who God is and what our responsibility is to Him. This passion helps us to unite us, and the energy we create is what allows us to achieve our individual growth as well as group development. Now, during the duration of this conference, we will be discussing various topics related to our Creator who, in His mercy, has provided us with a life manual as well as a blueprint to return to Him. It is my hope that these discussions will motivate you to critically re-examine the Muslim traditionalist religion of Islam with their man-made doctrines, their infatuation of the past, and their abandonment of the Quran in lieu of a return to the implementation of the Quran alone. My discussion today centers on Muslims in general, but specifically my target audience is our Muslim youth. We see our Muslim youth struggling with their desire to observe Islamic practices in non-Muslim countries, the impact of stereotypes and prejudice and other issues facing the younger generations of Muslims in America, and the challenges they face within their own Muslim communities, particularly in terms of generational divides. In this day of advanced technology and social media, they need to know that their lifestyles and preferences can, in fact, be compatible with Din al-Islam. They must know that they can dress however they choose, provided it is of a modest nature, or listen to music that older community members would not appreciate. You see, younger Muslims can integrate into society today without compromising their values or morals, and I feel it is the older generation that must demonstrate that the true teachings of Din al-Islam will help them to address the struggles and challenges of daily life that they face. You see, the common thread of all Muslims, young and old, is that we have a longing, a desire to find the truth. That ultimate truth is God alone. Therefore, the goal of this conference is to strive to build communities of brotherhood, understand the truth as God has revealed it to the messenger, and follow that truth sent down to him through his divine messages. Everything I speak about today is not my opinion, and I'll share some of my life experiences. However, there will be no speculation or conjecture on my part. Armed with just the ayats of God and the Quran alone, my attempt is to make the messages of God palatable for our youth to understand as to what your Creator has revealed to mankind, as well as our roadmap for success in this life and the life in the hereafter. Therefore, my contribution to this discussion is entitled Unlock Your Mind. In 1678, God says, "And God brought you forth from the wombs of your mothers. You knew nothing. And he gave you hearing and sight and intellect that you might give thanks." Here God is telling us that it is only by his mercy that we have been given the gifts of hearing, sight, and intellect. This is a reminder that when we were born, we were ignorant to the messages of God. But God gave us ears to hear, eyes to see, and a mind to think and reflect. These gifts have enabled us to know who God is and what our responsibility is to Him so that we can give thanks. However, when I decided to become Muslim, I was required to recite the Sunni Shahadatain, and from that point on, I was told what to say, what to do, what not to do, how to dress, how to act, and what I could eat. Now, looking back, I realized all my thoughts were not my own. They were based on what the so-called Muslim scholars ascertained from their Hadith literature was the best guidance for Muslims. My thoughts and beliefs were a culmination of what others communicated to me on certain subjects. The powers that be, that is, the Arabs, have created this false religion of Islam parallel to Din al-Islam, as we can see in 5.3. In 5.3 we read, "This day I perfected for you your deen and completed my favor for you and chose Islam as your deen." It was my understanding that their false religion, with all its rituals, rules, practices, and laws, based on the Prophet's hadiths, supersedes the dictates of the Quran. Moreover, according to the scholars, the Quran is incomplete without the hadiths of the Prophet, and you can't practice your religion without the Sunnah of the Prophet. So I blindly followed whatever I was told and didn't take the time to check the truth of their statements. My thoughts had become an intoxication of adopted thoughts, thoughts that were not actually mine, but some cultural or religious tradition taught by others, which I adopted without question. However, God reminds us in 67:23. He says, "Say, He it is who brought you into being and made for you ears and eyes and intellect. Little thanks it is you give." Here God's telling us that we're not grateful to Him for bestowing these blessings on us, and our ungratefulness has caused us not to be appreciative of these gifts. This ingratitude on our part causes us to hear everything with our ears except the messages of God, see everything with our eyes except the signs of God, and seriously consider all matters in life except Him who has shown mercy on us with His gifts. And as a result of our ungratefulness, God reveals in 7:179, "And certainly we have created for hell many of the jinn and men. They have hearts wherewith they understand not, and they have eyes wherewith they see not, and they have ears wherewith they hear not. They are cattle, nay, they are more astray. These are the heedless ones, el-Ghafiluna." Unfortunately, to our detriment, we see in this verse that some of us did not make use of these gifts and put our trust in God's messages in order to discern the truth from falsehood, and have made themselves fuel for hell by their evil deeds. Moreover, God shows us that we have strayed so far away from our true nature that we have literally locked our minds from the truth, and it is imperative that we unlock it. In 47:24, God says, "Do they not reflect on the Quran, or are there locks on their minds?" We have voluntarily put locks on our minds by following the so-called scholars' second source materials. They have somehow convinced the Muslim Ummah to put their trust in these outside sources as guidance for mankind. We see this evidenced in their Hadith literature in Sahih al-Bukhari, Book of Good Manners and Forms, and it's narrated by Tariq, where it says, "Abdullah said the best talk is Allah's book, Quran, and the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad." However, in contrast, armed with the implementation of the Quran, God alone holds the authority, not the scholars with their second source materials, to determine what is and is not the truth with respect to Din al-Islam. It is time to dispense with thoughts that are no longer ours and give thanks to God for His mercy. You see, we're Muslims striving to please our Lord in our deeds and actions, not Qur'anists or Qur'aniyun or Hadith rejectors or any other foolish name conjured up by individuals who want to put out the light of God with their mouths by telling us that Prophet Muhammad shares in God's authority to legislate and judge. Now is the precise moment to remove and replace the obsolete external thought structures imposed on us by the so-called quote-unquote scholars and those in authority. It's time to shed the thoughts that are not our own, but taught to us under the tutelage of an indoctrinated system, a system that limits our thinking and causes us to forget our soul's language to communicate within us. We have lost sight of our soul's language. We must reconnect with what was planted in our DNA when we were born instead of trying to fit into comparatives concocted by outside sources. Therefore, the struggle against the tide of our own minds remains constant until we can reconnect with our true nature, our fitra, according to Quran alone. All the answers you seek with respect to Din al-Islam are in the Quran alone, if you trust that God alone is the guide, El Hadi. We should put our trust in God and ask Him to guide our thinking, not ask the scholars where to look for guidance. And in 64:11, God does just that. He says, "No calamity befalls but by God's permission, and whoever trusts in God, He guides his thinking." If you unlock your mind from that old cultic mindset, you'll find the answers you seek in the Quran alone, and it'll serve as God's divine navigator in life's do's and don'ts, and contains examples of the truth and the best explanation of the truth. And in 25:33 we read, "And they cannot bring thee an example, a mathalan, but we have brought thee the truth, el haq, and the best explanation, aksanal tafsilan." Brothers and sisters, it's time to unlock your mind. We must remember that the mind is capable of understanding proof and evidence of the truth. Thoughtful and reasonable people will be able to follow the messages of God, making good use of this God-given gift. So what's got our minds locked? The answer is shirk. Shirk is an unforgivable sin. You see, most sins we commit harm our own souls and are crimes against ourselves. Shirk, however, is an unforgivable sin because it's a crime against God. Now, individuals who commit shirk commit two crimes. One, when you ascribe to any person, place, or thing other than God the ability to legislate, judge, and guide Muslims. And two, attributing closeness to any person, place, or thing who have no proximity to God whatsoever. Now, in 1965, we read, and I'm using Muhammad Assad's translation, "Lord of the heavens and the earth, and what is between them, so serve him and be patient in his service. Dost thou know any whose name is worthy to be mentioned side by side, Samiyan, with his?" The most fundamental tenet in Din al-Islam is belief in strict monotheism, that is Tawheed. The opposite of Tawheed is shirk, or associating partners with God, and is translated as polytheism. If one dies in this state, it is a clear rejection of God and his messages. In 4:48, God says, "Surely God forgives not setting up partners with him, and he forgives all besides this to whom he pleases. And whoever sets up a partner with God, he devises indeed a great sin." Even if people try their best to live a virtuous life and a generous life, all their efforts will count for nothing if their efforts are not built on a foundation of total monotheism. And in 39, 65, and 66 we read, "And certainly it has been revealed to thee and those before thee. If thou associate with God, thy work would certainly come to naught, and thou wouldst be a loser. Nay, but serve God alone and be of the thankful." And in 40:12, God says, "That is because when God alone, Allah wahdahu, was called upon, you disbelieved, kafartum. And when associates were given to him, you believed, tukminu. So judgment belongs to God, the High, the Great." And in 12:106 we read, "And most of them believe not in God without associating others with him." You see, shirk is the height of unappreciativeness on our part to not acknowledge someone who has given us everything. We completely are indebted to God and his mercy. In 6:12, God told the messenger, "Say, to whom belongs whatever is in the heavens and the earth? Say, to God. He has ordained mercy on himself. He will certainly gather you on the resurrection day. There is no doubt about it. And those who have lost their souls will not believe." In this verse, we read that God has decreed on himself that he show mercy to his creation. And this is how we show our gratitude? By having the audacity to associate some person, place, or thing with him? You know, it's an irony that we breathe his air, eat, sleep, and drink from his treasures, then totally forget him. Instead, we'll quickly thank someone else for something they did for us and believe it's bad manners if we don't do it. How crazy is that? How can we justify this kind of negligence and carelessness toward our Creator? We don't consider shirk as a moral problem. We often speak about morality and rights of others. However, the foremost right of God is to acknowledge there is no God but God. Whatever God has given us should be associated to him alone, and since these gifts are from him, our thankfulness should be to him alone. So let's talk about these people who have the audacity to behave in such a manner. Who does God say are the mushrikeen? In 6:107, God says, "Follow that in which is revealed, Uhiya, to thee from thy Lord. There is no God but he, and turn away from the polytheists, mushrikeen." We can see in this verse God is speaking to the messenger and telling him to follow what was Uhiya to him. There is no God but he, and turn away from the mushriks. Moreover, according to this verse, a mushrik is only happy when they trust in two or more things for their guidance. For example, Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet. And God says to turn away from them. Moreover, in 6:19 we read, "Say, what thing is the weightiest in testimony? Say, God is witness between you and me, and this Quran has been revealed, Uhiya, to me, that with it I may warn you and whomsoever it reaches. Do you really bear witness that there are other gods besides God? Say, I bear not witness. Say, he is only one God, and surely I am innocent of that which you set up with him." In this verse, it's clear that the messenger is saying he only follows what is Uhiya to him, and what was Uhiya to him was the Quran alone. You see, a mushrik now and during the time of the messenger are people who believe in God but rejected the messengers of God alone, Quran alone. And in 6:61 through 63, God talks about these mushriks. He says, and if thou ask them, who created the heavens and the earth, and made the sun and the moon subservient? They would say, God. Why then are they turned away? God makes abundant the means of subsistence for whom he pleases of his servants, or straightens them for him. Surely God is knower of all things. And if thou ask them, who is it that sends down water from the clouds, then gives life to the earth with it after its death? They will say, God. Say, praise be to God. Nay, most of them understand not. This is why these people are mushriks, and they have literally locked their minds from the truth by denying and rejecting God's right to be the sole authority to legislate, judge, and guide. So, what's their excuse for committing shirk? In 10:18 we read, and they serve besides God that which can neither harm them nor profit them. And they say, these are our intercessors with God. And in 39:3 we read, now surely sincere obedience is due to God alone. And those who choose protectors besides him say, we serve them only that they may bring us nearer to God. Surely God will judge between them in that in which they differ. Surely God guides not him who is a liar, ungrateful. You see, their excuses before are the same excuses the scholars use to justify why they commit shirk today. They turn away from the guidance and turn toward their second source materials because they trust that the prophet will intercede for them on the day of accountability. The mushrikeen are incapable of allowing God to be the sole authority in matters of Din al-Islam. They believe in God, in the day of judgment, and in heaven and hell, all fragments that remained from the Deen of Abraham. The vast majority believe in God, but they're not Muslim. And in 38:4-5 we read, and they wonder that a warner from among them has come to them. And the disbelievers said, this is an enchanter, a liar. Makes he the gods a single god? Surely this is a strange thing. You see, to those individuals then, and the scholars today, failed to trust in God alone and considered it a thing that was unbelievable. Monotheism seemed not only incomprehensible to them, but they were more concerned about being driven out of their country. And in 28:57 we read, and they say, if we follow El-Huda with you, Ma'aka, we should be carried off from our country. Have we not settled them in a safe, sacred territory to which fruits of every kind are drawn, a sustenance from us, but most of them know not. These ungrateful mushriks were more concerned about being driven out of their country. They worried about what people will think of them, being shunned and ridiculed by their peers, and lose the sense of belonging. But what they failed to realize is in the end, they would lose their souls on the day of accountability for their actions. So if you think about it for a moment, reciting the Sunni Shahadatain made me a mushrik because it affirmed associating partners with God by bearing witness to Muhammad and accepting that Prophet Muhammad shares God's authority to legislate, judge, and guide. As a former follower of Hadith traditions, I can say that my thoughts weren't my own. I had accepted what the Sunni scholars taught me, which was to respect and believe that the Quran was a holy book from God. However, it was a book that gave us commands as what to do. For example, pray and fast, etc. But the Hadiths told us how to do it. And my actions are evidenced in 9:31, where Allah says, they take their doctors of law and their monks for lords besides God, and also the Messiah, son of Mary. And they were enjoined that they should serve one God only. There is no God but He. Be glorified from that which they set up with Him. And in 278 and 79, we read, and some of them are illiterate. They know not the book, but only from hearsay, and they do but conjecture. Woe then it is to them who write the book with their hands and say, this is from God, so that they may take it for a small price. So woe to them for what their hands write, and woe to them for what they earn. It was at this point, brothers and sisters, it was time to unlock my mind. You see, I decided to unlock my mind because I could clearly see the difference between what the Sunni scholars told me to follow, which was Prophet Muhammad via the Quran and the so-called authentic hadith, in contrast to God revealing to the messenger to follow the Quran alone. And we see this in 7203 when the messenger said the Quran alone is the only thing he followed. And when thou bringest them not a sign, they say, why dost thou not demand it? Say, I follow only, innama, that which is revealed, yuha, to me from my Lord. These are clear proofs from your Lord, and a guide and a mercy for people who believe. So, how do we unlock our minds? Well, in 7:3, God tells you, follow what has been sent down to you from your Lord, and follow not, besides him, any guardian, little do you mind. So, what we can glean from this verse is, one, whatever we're told to follow was sent down, nazala, and revealed from God, and two, he also tells us we should not have any guardians other than him. Because in 39:62, God says he is the guardian over everything. God is the creator of all things, and he is the guardian over everything. History bears out that the Arabs in Saudi Arabia have elected themselves as guardians and explainers of their parallel man-made religion of Islam with all its rituals and practices. However, in the absence of clear parameters for determining the rightful owners of such explanation of the religious text, conflicts over the right to explain the text or to authorize the quote-unquote correct explanation of it have partially shaped the early evolution of Islamic history. Historical records indicate that political and religious authorities split very early in the Sunni tradition shortly after the Prophet's death. The ulama's central role was, by virtue of their scholarship, their quote-unquote competent human agency to discover God's law, and the fact that they largely stood for the quote-unquote best interest of their community as guardians of the religion, supposedly legitimized their claim. However, we see historically the problem for the contemporary Sunni ulama rests in the definition and scope of their authority. Challenges to the sole Sunni legal authority of El-Azhar have arisen in Saudi Arabia with its state-sponsored Permanent Council for Scientific Research and Legal Opinions. Hanbali jurists who issue fatwas through this medium are able to affect much of the Arabic-speaking world through the power of electronic communication. The tendency towards such authoritarian discourses in the Sunni world have been challenged by individuals who wish to assert the egalitarian possibilities of a more accessible ulama. For example, Sudanese President Hassan el-Turabi has argued that the ulama should consist of all devout, educated Muslims, not only those strictly trained in legal and theological matters. Such populist assertions undermine pre-modern precedent and underscore the deep divide within Sunni Muslim society today over the definition of religious and legal authority. The continued power and legitimacy of the ulama as leaders for the Sunni Muslim majority worldwide remains a matter of heated debate. Therefore, these conflicts and discrepancies continue regarding who holds the authority to explain the religious text. So, while they jockey for that position, we have seen that God has revealed in 3962 He is the sole authority and sole guardian over everything.
One important point here I want to stress is if you want to know something about a particular topic and you've looked in the book and you don't see the details on it, then God gives you an quote unquote out, so to speak. He tells us in 1736, and follow not that of which thou hast no knowledge. Surely the hearing and the sight and the intellect, all of these will be asked. Now God's telling us in this verse that if you're not sure about something, or you don't see what you're looking for, or you don't understand something in the book, leave it alone. And don't go following or doing anything that you have no knowledge of. Just 1736 it. Anything that you're not sure of, leave it alone until the meaning is made clear to you. Don't start guessing or making stuff up that you may think is right. Now, how simple is that? And in 21:14, God goes on to tell us, supremely exalted, then is God the King, the truth. And make not haste with the Quran before its revelation is made complete to thee. And say, my Lord, increase me in knowledge. It's time to unlock your mind. You see, the book is our reminder which teaches us right from wrong and how to act according to its instructions. However, instead of following the reminder, I turned away from it and instead listened to the scholars. I left the Quran on a shelf at home and dusted it off occasionally like it was some type of holy relic to be admired. When I decided to take the Quran off the shelf and actually read the messages of God, it opened up a whole new world of knowledge and understanding. I felt at this point it was time to unlock my mind and take back control of my thoughts and allow God to guide my thinking. And we see this in 64:11, where God says, whoever trusts in God, he guides his heart, his thinking. So with this newfound knowledge, I focused my attention to allow myself to retrain my brain's capacity and unlock my mind to allow my understanding of this deen to grow and evolve in response to the new information and leave that old cultic thinking to the big-bearded scholars, regardless of what my family or friends thought or said, because at the end of the day, it is my soul that's on the line when I die and stand before God on the day of resurrection. I re-educated myself regarding my spiritual growth and put my trust in God alone and followed El Huda because God promised me if I did that, I would have no fear, no grief, nor would I go astray or be unhappy. And we read in 123 and 124, God promises mankind divine guidance. He said, go forth from here all, surely it will come to you guidance from me. Then whoever follows my guidance, he will not go astray nor be unhappy. And whoever turns away from my reminder, for him is surely a life of hardship, and we shall raise him up blind on the day of resurrection. But the most important thing to understand is you must trust that God will guide your thinking. You don't have to ask anyone. We're falling into the habit of people telling us what the truth is instead of trusting that God will guide you. The Arabs have us believing that they are the only people on the planet who understand what God has revealed. They have made themselves guardians of this parallel man-made religion of Islam with all its rituals, customs, and practices, and everyone must follow what they say is right. They are pretty much telling us that we shouldn't use our own minds. They will think for us and tell us what's right and wrong. So now we need to know what to follow, whether it's the Quran alone or the Quran and the Hadith of the Prophet. And in 2:185, God makes things crystal clear, and he names what his divine guidance is, El Huda. He says, the month of Ramadan is that in which the Quran was revealed, a guidance to men and clear proofs of the guidance. It doesn't get any clearer than that. It's not rocket science or something that the scholars must tell you. God is communicating clearly to each one of us personally. Contrary to what the scholars say, God does have the ability to communicate to his creation without help. He doesn't need some scholar to say, well, what God is trying to say is. And I was constantly told, oh, sister, you don't know anything because you don't know Arabic. Seriously? Seriously? Well, armed with the Quran alone and this newfound knowledge, my retort to that ignorant statement was, Salam, brother. Oh, and by the way, I'm not name calling. I am just repeating what God calls them in his book, the ignorant, the Jahiluna, in 25:63, because they are ignorant to his messages. And we read in 25:63, and the servants of the beneficent are they who walk on the earth in humility. And when the ignorant address them, they say peace. God explains in his book why Arabic is not some special or preferred language. But the topic of the language of the Quran goes beyond the scope of this talk. However, what I will say is from what I understand in reading the Quran, Arabic is not some special language or the language of God. It just happened to be the language the Arabs spoke. And we see this evidenced in 14:4, where God revealed to the messenger, and we sent no messenger but with the language of his people, so that he might explain to them clearly. So if Arabic is the language God speaks, and it was such a special language, to the exclusion of other languages, then the message would have had to been told to all the prophets from Adam to Muhammad in Arabic. And of course that's not the case, because the message sent to each messenger was in the language of his people. So when messengers were sent to the Bani Israel, most likely the messages were in Hebrew or Aramaic. And moreover, in 2:13, we see this position supported as well when God reveals, mankind is a single nation. So God raised prophets as bearer of good news and warners, and he revealed with them the book with truth, that it might judge between people concerning that in which they differed. Now, at this point, you must ask yourself, what thoughts do I need to declutter or at a minimum double check? You see, my previous thoughts were not my own, but a collection of someone else's thoughts superimposed on my mind consciously or unconsciously. Therefore, I concluded that since another perspective was presented to me, I wasn't going to continue to live in other individuals' thoughts or beliefs. Well, today is the day that you are presented with another perspective. You see, the side effects of not allowing someone to control your mind is one where we don't allow certain thoughts and patterns of thoughts of others control our thinking. And as a result, our lives will forever be lacking fear or grief and be at peace. God has told us by adopting specific points of views of others, specifically the thoughts of those that do not follow El Huda, their thoughts can keep us deaf, dumb, and blind forever and view life through created filters. And in 170 and 171, God tells us about those who are deaf, dumb, and blind. And when it is said to them, follow what God has sent down, they say, nay, we follow that wherein we found our fathers. What? Even though their fathers had no sense at all, nor were they not being guided? And the example of those who disbelieve is as the example of one who calls out to that which hears no more than a call or a cry, deaf, dumb, blind, so they have no sense.
And in 2573, God tells us not to fall deaf, dumb, and blind, even with His word. And they who, when reminded of the messages of God, fall not down thereat deaf, dumb, and blind. You see, God wants you to be sure that whatever you read in the Quran, it is from Him. And He tells us in 482 to check to see if it is, in fact, His word. And if it is not from Him, you will find many discrepancies.
And in 482, God reveals, will they not ponder on the Quran? And if it were from any other than God, they would have found in it many a discrepancy. As a former Sunni Muslim and follower of Hadith traditions, certain thoughts taught to me by those in authority left me with a lot of questions at times. However, the scholars said all these so-called authentic hadiths should be accepted without question because the chain of narration is considered an exact science. These issues have already been certified by those in authority. Therefore, there was no need to question anything. Well, I grew up as a Roman Catholic, and that's the same thing I was told in Catholic school. There's no need to question anything. Just take it on faith. Well, I think not. And it was clearly time for me to reset, reboot, and unlock my mind. I decided the solution to my problem was giving these so-called scholars control over my thoughts was to immediately stop externalizing my understanding of what the truth was imposed upon me by them and cease giving others the power to control my thoughts. I don't blame these scholars who have tried to inflict their perspectives and beliefs on my mind. After all, they have an agenda, and I finally realized it has nothing to do with my spiritual well-being as far as who God is and what my responsibility is to Him. Their hidden agenda is about controlling the masses of people and making money doing it.
And how can I say that with certainty? Because God certifies that's the truth in 56:80 through 82 when He told the messenger to say to His people, His Qawm, the Arabs, a revelation from the Lord of the worlds. Is this the hadith that you disdain and make your denial your means of subsistence? God is saying in these verses that the messenger's people, the Arabs then, and the Arabs now deny the divine revelation El Huda and make their denial their means of making a living. The scholars today simply cannot ascribe to God alone, Quran alone, because one, any social media outlet from which they derive any income will cause them to lose all their subscribers, or two, their benefactors who pay them to disseminate the belief in the hadith of the Prophet and in turn follow his sunnah will cut off their means of making a livelihood. All their support and sponsorship will be discontinued immediately, and they can't afford to let that happen because they have families, reputations, and responsibilities to take care of. So, instead of placing the blame on the scholars for my misguiding my thoughts, I take full responsibility for my actions. God gives us a glimpse of the future and warns us in 33:66 through 67 that on the day of accountability, what those individuals will say who continued to choose to be misguided by the scholars. They're not only going to try to blame their scholars for leading them astray, but they proceed to throwing them under the bus. And we see this in 33:66 through 68, when Allah reveals, on the day when their leaders are turned back into the fire, they say, "Oh, would that we had obeyed God and his messenger." And they say, "Our Lord, we only obeyed our leaders and our great men, so they led us astray from the path. Our Lord, give them a double chastisement and curse them with a great curse." So, to find thoughts that were truly my own, I began questioning the truth to their statements rather than blindly accept what the scholars told me was the truth of the matter. At no point should we allow our thinking to be held prisoner by someone else. Thoughts have the power to define our lives, and if we're not careful with this power, others can dictate the terms of engagement with life itself. If we're not careful, our minds will forever stay locked away, get caught up in the scholar's false religion, and be led astray from the depths of knowing the truth about who God is and what our responsibility is to Him. You must let the Quran speak to you personally, because it is a personal conversation between you and the Lord of the worlds. In 21:10, God says, "Certainly we have revealed to you, Ilaykum, the reader, a book wherein is your reminder. Do you not then understand?" Here God's telling us in his book, among other things, the book is our reminder which teaches us right from wrong and how to act according to its instructions. We don't need any explanations from Ibn Abbas or Ibn Kathir or Ibn Taymiyyah or any other Ibn for that matter. All we need for our divine guidance is El Huda, which is the Quran alone, because previously we touched on the fact that the divine guidance is El Huda in 2:120, and in 2:185 God names that guidance the Quran and said it is clear proofs of the guidance. And if we look in 25:33, God says, "And they cannot bring thee a question, but we have brought thee the truth, el haq, and the best explanation, aksan el tafsilan." So here we see the so-called scholars of the religion of Islam have pretty much missed the mark again. God makes it clear so there's no ambiguity in his message. It is not only the truth, el haq, but it is the best explanation, aksan el tafsilan. So we don't need any explanations from any of those so-called scholars from that false religion of Islam. Moreover, in 2:23, God tells us what specifically we will receive as guidance and clears up any ambiguity. "And if you are in doubt as to that which we have revealed to our servant, then produce a surah like it, and call upon your helpers besides God if you are truthful." You see, God sent down surahs for our divine guidance. Will any of those so-called Muslim scholars dare to call any of their hadiths a surah? I think not. And not only did God send down surahs for our guidance, in 39:23, God reveals to his messenger, "God has revealed the best hadith, Aksanul Hadithi, a book consistent repeating its injunctions, whereat do shudder the skins of those who fear their Lord. Then their skins and their hearts soften to God's remembrance." This is God's guidance. He guides with it whom he pleases, and he whom God leaves in error, there's no guide for him. And then God goes on further to say in 45:6, "These are the ayats of God which we recite to you in truth. In what hadith will you then trust after God and his ayats?" You know, as I ponder these verses, I cannot understand how Sunni Muslims overlook two important points when reading these verses in the Quran. One, that God sent down surahs for our guidance. And two, the Quran is the best hadith, the Aqsanal hadith, and with it, be he, not them, he alone guides. So why would anyone trust any other hadith and turn away from the ayats of God?
And we see in 5681, God tells these people who turn away from his ayats, is this the hadith that you dislike?
And in 31:6, God addresses these scholars regarding the hadiths they follow for their guidance, and directly condemns all their outside source material and calls them laqul hadithi. And of men is he who takes instead frivolous discourse, laqul hadithi, to lead astray from God's path without knowledge and to make it a mockery. For such is an abasing chastisement. Furthermore, in 5:15 and 16, God continues to detail what it is he has revealed to mankind, a light and a clear book for our guidance. O people of the book, indeed our messenger has come to you, making clear to you much of that which you concealed of the book and passing over much. Indeed, there has come to you from God a light and a clear book. With it, Bihi, God guides such as follow his pleasure into the ways of peace and brings them out of darkness into the light by his will and guides them to the straight path. You see, God revealed one book, the Quran alone. And contrary to what the scholars teach, God does not certify any of the volumes of book, such as Sahih Bukhari, Muslim, and Sahih Sita, as we saw in the previous verse. Therefore, when a Muslim man or woman finally decides to put his or her trust in the Lord of the worlds instead of the scholars, he or she must shed all that misinformation and outside knowledge they were taught by them and come mentally clean to his book, or else they will not find the answers that they seek. As we see in 56:78 through 80, God tells us, in a book that is protected, which none touches save the purified ones, a revelation from the Lord of the worlds. When God speaks of the purified ones in this verse, I understand that to mean you cannot come to this book and try to understand its meaning using the scholar's outside source material. Any person who reads the Quran and tries to superimpose that outside knowledge you've acquired from the Sunni second source materials, then try to understand what God is conveying to you in his book, thinking that you'll find the answers you seek, you will not find any answers. When you open this book to read it, you must purify your thoughts and leave all that baggage you were taught behind you. You will not understand God's messages unless and until you come to this book purified and devoid of any person, place, or thing that is associated with God. There is nothing left out of the book that can further assist you in any instructions, legislation, judgments, or guidance on anything related to Deen al-Islam. This is the truth, el-Haq, from your Lord. Now we've seen in previous verses, the prophet in his capacity as messenger only followed the messages of God contained in the Quran, which was surahs that were sent down and revealed to him. The messenger in turn had definite the revelation to his people, which is why God calls his book the best hadith. Therefore, the messenger couldn't have possibly said any of those things ascribed to him in their hadith literature, because had the messenger said anything other than what God told him to say, God tells us in 69:43 through 51, it is a revelation from the Lord of the worlds. And if he had fabricated against us certain sayings, we would have certainly seized him by the right hand, then cut off his heart's vein, and not one of you could have withheld us from him. And surely it is a reminder for the dutiful, and we will certainly know that some of you are rejectors, and it is indeed a source of grief to the disbelievers, and surely it is the certain truth. Therefore, these verses clearly show that the prophet, in his capacity as the messenger of God, never said or did or silently approved of in his presence anything other than what was sent down and revealed to him. Moreover, in 2885, God told the prophet in his capacity as messenger, "He who has made the Quran binding, fard, on thee, alayka, will surely bring thee back to the place of return. Say, my Lord knows best him who has brought the guidance and him who is in manifest error, dhalal mubin." You see, God made the whole Quran fard on the messenger. Therefore, he could not have possibly brought something else that explains or elaborates on any issue or was equal to the Quran as guidance from Muslims, as the Sunni scholars purport is the need for their second source materials. And as our theme suggests, only the truth matters. And the truth is, as we have seen, God communicates in detail and makes it crystal clear in his book regarding what we should be following as far as divine guidance of God, which is the Quran alone. And in 1032, God says, "Such then is God, your true Lord. And what is there after the truth, el-haq, except the error, el-dhalalu? How then are you turned away?" Given all this proof from the Quran, the scholars have not only misunderstood and misinterpreted these verses, but they also convey these errors to the Muslim Ummah in their parallel religion of Islam created by them. And whether this misinformation was conveyed consciously or unconsciously, the scholars have convinced most Muslims to abandon the Book of God and turn to their outside source materials for additional guidance. They have somehow convinced the Muslim Ummah that they are the guardians of the religion of Islam, and it is only through them and the volumes of Hadith literature can you understand the real meaning God is trying to convey to you in his book. However, as we saw in 2885, God says they are clearly astray, the lal mubin, by not following the guidance he sent down, and by creating their own little religious sects like the Sunnis, the Shiites, the Sufis, the Wahhabis, the Qadianis, the Lahoris, and the Salafis, each rejoicing in their own sect, all in the name of God. But God told the messenger to have nothing to do with them in 6:160 when he said, "As for those who split up their religion and became sects, thou hast no concern with them. Their affair is only with God. Then he will inform them of what they did." And we read in 23:53 and 54, "But they became divided into sects, each party rejoicing in that which was with them. So leave them in their ignorance till a time." And in 3:104, God said, "And be not like those who became divided and disagreed after clear arguments had come to them, and for them is a grievous chastisement." You see, the scholars seem to overlook these critical verses in the Quran that go against all that they purport to be the truth regarding their outside source materials. And in 12:106, we see that God says, "And most of them believe not in God without associating others with him." And in 23:70, God says, "Or say they, there is madness in him? Nay, he has brought them the truth, and most of them hate the truth." And in 30:42, God says, "Say, travel in the land, then see what was the end of those before. Most of them were polytheists, mushrikina." And in 6:117 we read, "And if thou obey most of those in the earth, they will lead thee astray from God's way. They follow naught but conjecture, and they only lie." You see, it's important to think about what God is telling us, not only in the previous verses, but particularly in this verse. You see, I hear a lot of Muslims say, everyone's following Hadith and Sunnah of the Prophet, so how can billions of Muslims be wrong? Well, in 67:23, we read that God gave us the gifts of hearing, sight, and intellect, and little thanks we give to Him. Well, this is where we can show our gratitude for these God given gifts and use our own intellect to ascertain the validity of their statement. When I decided to ponder and think about that statement, I realized the so called quote unquote majority belief or numbers of people they referred to doesn't make that statement true because one, the majority of Jews rejected Jesus as a prophet of God. Two, the majority of Christians believe Jesus is the Son of God. And three, the majority of Muslims believe that the habits of the Prophet Muhammad are the model behavior to imitate in our daily lives and that he guides to the truth. More importantly, God answers that question in this verse and says, if you obey the majority of people on this earth and follow anything else other than his divine revelation, you will be led astray. And, according to this verse, what the so called scholars of this false religion of Islam are telling you is only conjecture on their part and from their outside source materials. Now, they, number one, are speaking about God without knowledge, without guidance, and without an illuminating book. And we see that in 22:8. And two, God calls these individuals who conjecture liars because in the end, they'll stand before him and say, yeah, Allah, I wasn't of the mushrikeen. And you can read that conversation in 6:23. And God tells us in the very next verse, 6:24, see how they lie against their own souls, and that which they forge has failed them? You see, God is telling us what these individuals will say to Him when they stand before Him on the day of accountability. Now, can you imagine standing before God and have the audacity to lie to God in His presence? So ask yourself, am I following what the majority of Muslims are following? Am I following those people who God calls El Ghafiluna, the heedless ones in 7:179, because they are heedless to God's messages, ungrateful for his gifts, and are more astray? If the answer is yes, then it would be wise to reconsider your actions. Brothers and sisters, unlock your mind and rethink your actions before you die and stand before your Lord. Because we see in 1856, God says, and we send not messengers, but as giver of good news and warning. And those who disbelieve contend with falsehood, bil batil, to weaken thereby the truth, el haq. And they take my messages and the warning for a mockery. You know, to my young Muslim brothers and sisters, this is serious stuff you are betting your souls on. And I stress this because I have encountered some young Muslims who have traveled overseas and supposedly, quote unquote, studied this false religion of Islam the scholars have created and come back thinking they are so knowledgeable and then have the nerve to call those of us who follow Quran alone kufas. What? You know, your Muslim brothers and sisters who follow Quran alone and are reciting to you the ayats of God only are kuffars? Whatever happened to you want for your brother what you want for yourself? If these so-called learned individuals believe that we are misguided, then let's discuss the matter like God has instructed us to do instead of just name calling. Moreover, to add insult to injury, their so-called scholars have recently resorted to telling the Muslim Ummah not to listen to us, not to listen to Muslims who are reciting only the ayats of God to them. You know, we're telling them what their Lord has instructed and commanded for all of mankind to do to have success in this life and the hereafter. And these scholars don't want to listen? Now, how bizarre is that? You know, it's my belief that they don't want to listen because one, they'll be accountable for what they hear, and two, what argument can they bring against the ayats of God? So instead of name calling from afar and refusing to listen to what your fellow Muslim brothers and sisters are conveying to you, which are the messages of God alone, can we at least do what he has commanded us to do in 16:125 to ascertain the truth of the matter? And God tells us in 16:125, call to the way of your Lord with wisdom and goodly exhortation, and argue with them in the best manner. Surely thy Lord knows best him who strays from his path, and he knows best who go aright. You know, our sole endeavor for establishing our annual Tawheed conference each year is to present the true messages of God, not only to young Muslims in particular, but because they represent the future of Din al-Islam, but to the Muslim Ummah and the whole world in general. That is, Din al-Islam as it is found in the Quran alone, obscured today by grave misconceptions, wrong popular notions, and unnecessary rituals, practices, and restrictions due to their infatuation with past generations and what they did. But we see in 2:141, God says that we will not be held responsible for what past generations did. We read, those are people that have passed away, and for them is what they earned, and for you is what you earned. And you will not be asked of what they did. So contrary to what the scholars say Muslims must do in order to follow the sunnah of the Prophet, we can clearly see in this verse that we don't have to imitate what the Prophet or his companions did regarding anything in Din al-Islam, such as dyeing your beard red, squatting when you eat, eating with your right hand only with 3 fingers, or wearing your pants above your ankles. Din al-Islam seeks to attract the hearts and minds of all mankind, irrespective of your ethnic background, to the Quran alone. And he says the noblest of us displays the best character, the character of taqwa, which is strict monotheism. And we see this in 49:13, and we read, O mankind, surely we have created you from a male and a female, and made you tribes and families that you may know each other. Surely the noblest of you with God is the most dutiful of you. Atakum. Surely God is knowing, aware. You see, Din al-Islam is the only way that can unite mankind and make us one single nation again, as we read in 2:213. But unfortunately, due to our ungratefulness, God tells mankind in 22:46, have they not traveled in the land so that they should have hearts with which to understand, or ears with which to hear? For surely it is not the eyes that are blind, but blind are the hearts which are in the breast. And in conclusion, brothers and sisters, as well as those of you who have yet to declare your submission to the Lord of the worlds, unlock your mind, because you are being misled by individuals who are trying to put out the light of God with their mouths and their gilded speech, as we see in 6:113. And Allah says, and thus did we make for every prophet an enemy, the devils from among men and jinn, some of them inspiring others with gilded speech to deceive them. And if thy Lord pleased, they would not do it. So leave them alone with what they forge. You know, it is my hope that the Muslims and non-Muslims in general, and our Muslim youth in particular, will come to their senses and see the seriousness of their actions and the price they will pay for being ignorant of God's messages. We have been given free will. Therefore, you can choose to put your trust in the messages of God and follow the commands prescribed for you and those before you in the Quran alone, or you can turn away from the book and follow the fabricated teachings of your religious leaders and look for guidance in their false religion of Islam or in some other person, place, or thing. The choice is yours. Are you going to take the red pill or the blue pill? Which path will you take? The path of truth or the path of falsehood? Disconnect from this matrix we've been conditioned to follow, which according to the scholars is supposedly the only true option. Unlock your mind and start reprogramming it and know that there is only one truth, El Haq. You may have to unlearn some things and you might need to purify your thoughts. Cleanse those old ideas and disconnect from that mentality God calls cattle mentality, the Gafiluna, the heedless ones in 7179, because they fail to heed the messages of God and turn away from God's guidance and look to something or someone else for guidance. Brothers and sisters, don't let others decide which path you should take. You choose your own path. La ilaha illallah wa ana minal muslimina. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.